Here we go. We are live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to WIIL2B podcast with your host.
It's me, Yeefa.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Yeefa. I am the host of WIIL2B podcast. Welcome to episode 10. And my guest this evening is Rusia Mohuiddan. And before I introduce her, I'd like to give you an overview of how the format works. Rusia and I will be chatting. We're going to dive deep into her will and desire to do extraordinary things. I welcome any questions throughout the podcast, so please ask away. If you're new to my podcast, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Yeefahdotcom, and hit the notifications button to get notified when new podcasts air. Like, comment, and share to your friends and family. And if you're watching the replay, please make comments or ask questions. I will reply. Rusia Mohiuddin comes from Jadu Mia stock. Her grandfather is a Jadu Mia and was a founding father of the Bangladeshi independence struggle. She's been an organizer for over 25 years. She started organizing over 100 people in the first bilingual Bengali program at Public School 20 in New York City's borough, the Bronx. She's written several books, is an artist, master trainer, facilitator, coach, and strategist. Recently, she pioneered the integration of somatics into a new community organizing model called Embody Organizing. Thank you, Rusia, for joining me. I really appreciate this so much. This has been something that I've wanted to do ever since I met you in the workshop that I participated in when you were actually a speaker for this workshop. So thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Thank you very much, Yeefa, for having me. I'm honored. I'm really looking forward to our conversation tonight.
I'd like to start off with you giving me a little bit of background about yourself and how you got into organizing. I'm really interested in this connection to your grandfather and his being one of the first or founding fathers of the independence struggle.
Yeah, it's like one of those things where there's not like a realization of what someone has done that's like deeply of significance in the way that they did it until there's some like personal experience. At least that's how my sort of brain works, my understanding works. And I didn't realize that my grandfather was an organizer. I don't know how much people know about Bangladesh. Bangladesh used to be East Pakistan, and then before there was an East and a West Pakistan, it was all a part of India.
Okay.
And so during the struggle for Bangladeshi independence, my grandfather was, he went underground, he organized folks, and founded the Bangladesh National Party, and later became a politician and helped bring folks into positions to help the people. And my mother reminded us of him saying, the source of all power is people. Like, he just really always believed that. And I never understood it. It just sort of was like something that I heard a lot. And in, I believe, September 1996, I had returned to Bangladesh after a really long time. My aunt got married, my cousin got married, and I'm back. I've had graduated already, and one of my majors was philosophy, but I didn't know what to do with that afterwards, and I didn't have money to go. I didn't have money to continue education in a master's and a doctorate, which I really wanted to do because I enjoyed being in school. And a friend of mine, I decided one day I was going to get my resume together. And I did it. And a friend of mine from college called me and asked me if I wanted a job. So this is fortuitous. This is like, providence. Something is happening here.
Right.
I was like, yes, I do. And it turned out to be this job as a community organizer at Marshall Woodlawn South Community Coalition, which was this organization is structured differently now. The Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition was made up of 10 neighborhood associations.
Okay.
So then I started organizing, and people are like, oh, you do this, you do that. And for 6 months, I could only describe what my job was by literally saying what I was doing, which was basically bringing people together, people who had common problems together to come up with common solutions. And once I got into the flow of it, then I understood, like, oh, here's my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who, Jadu Mia in Bengali means magic man. Like, he had a way of, he would talk to one person on the street, and I have a series of successive pictures of him talking to one person, and then the crowd was just building and building and building.
Oh my gosh.
But this was the kind of man he was. He organized people, he ignited people and catalyzed hope. And he let, Bangladesh is like a very poor country. So he made, the common citizen believe that they had power when everything in their life and in their world was telling them that they had nothing. So I understood that this was a tradition that I was continuing in a way that was a part of, like, my genealogy, my legacy that I hope to continue from him, from my mother.
Yeah, it's interesting because before we got on, I didn't know about your mother being an organizer too, as well. So is it, and this is your mother from your grandfather, or like or your paternal, or okay?
Yes. My mother is the oldest of 11 children.
Oh wow.
She wasn't necessarily an organizer, but she has a way with words and a way with people. People are drawn to her. She's an incredible human being. Totally badass, if I can say the.
You can curse on
a beep word real quick.
You can totally curse.
Yeah. A totally amazing human being, and I think the best representation and embodiment of the values that my grandfather worked his entire life for. She was a politician. She was a member of parliament.
Okay.
So not exactly an organizer, but.
Well, can you explain a little bit for the audience the difference between like an organizer or an activist or a politician? Like, how are they? What are the differences and similarities, maybe even?
Yeah, I mean, taking politicians aside, who I think are public servants, which is how my grandfather was, which is how my mother had her political career, that they were literally, there's no ambiguity that they were public servants. Organizing, community organizing and activism, along with advocacy, they're strategies for social change, right? There are different methodologies to achieve social change. An activist, for example, a lot of us are activists, are folks who participate in issues that don't directly affect them. So I went to a lot of the sort of no war in Iraq protests back in the day, and that I was an activist because I didn't live in Iraq and the war wasn't going to directly affect me. An organizer is someone who facilitates bringing people together, right? So the power, decision making, the solutions are made by those who are directly impacted. And it's one of the reasons why I believe in my heart of hearts, the community organizing is the strategy for social change. And it's why I've dedicated my life to it, my adult life to it.
It's really interesting because when you talk about how your grandfather I think you said you had a picture of him where people were sort of lined up, kind of following him.
Tiny black and whites. Series of them.
And what's interesting is because when I participated in the workshop that you were presenting, I kind of got that feeling from you. It's like, wow, I want to listen to this person. I want to, I want to hear what she's saying, and like, let's do what she's saying. And I think that it's interesting that that's passed down, from you, from either from hearing him, or maybe it's, a part of your, like you said, of your legacy and your DNA. I'm not sure. What do you feel it is?
That's such a good question. My grandfather died in 1979. I was like not 6 yet. I was like 5, almost 6. I have vivid memories of him, being around him, hearing stories. And at that time, we didn't live in Bangladesh. We lived in Melbourne, Australia, my family. But very close. That's a closer trip to Bangladesh than New York is.
That's interesting.
I feel like there are values that he passed down to my mother, that she passed down obviously to her children. My mother's a really amazing storyteller. Like for me, it feels like she's narrating a memory for me. That's how amazing she is.
Yeah.
And then if I couple that with my maternal grandmother, who I was incredibly close to, who I deeply loved, there were these values of like being the right person at the right time, in service of her family, that was then in service of like the whole country.
Yes.
Wow. She never talked about herself in a way that was like, look at what I did. She was just a very humble,
yes,
very powerful woman. And I feel like most of how I want to be in the world is like her.
Yeah.
I really want to navigate my relationships the way she navigated her relationship with me, and her relationships in life.
Yeah.
She was an incredibly pious woman, and just good, like just a good human being. Never yelled, never said anything bad, but was always honest. It was always honest. And I say this to all the folks that I come across as often as I can, that it's okay to not withhold what you're thinking and feeling. You don't wield the truth as a weapon. There's a nice way to say even the hardest things. And that's my grandmother. It doesn't come from anyone other than my grandmother, because my mother's fiery. My grandfather is fiery. And, here's my grandmother. Like, you just always feel like wrapped in love anytime she spoke to you about even the hardest things.
Which I think is really difficult to do, especially, I think this is maybe a good way to segue into your somatic work, because when you feel affronted, when you feel that someone is against you, when you feel anger by something that someone has done, quote unquote, to you, you want to react, you want to be angry, you want to say something fiery, you want to tear them down, you want them to feel the way you feel. Yeah. And it's very interesting, this idea of somatic work coming into organizing, coming into activism, because that changes the scenario, that changes the dynamics of this, wielding the fire. And maybe starting off by talking about what somatics is, because a lot of people don't know what that is.
Sure. I mean, I feel like somatics is something that's easier experienced than it is talked about. And I know there's like many people that can talk about somatics much better than I can. And the work that I do, it comes from the tradition of somatics, but it's really deeply ingrained and grounded around embodied leadership. But one of my mentors and teachers, Richard Strozzi Heckler, says that somatics comes from the Greek word soma, which means the body in its living wholeness. And it's about It's basically mind, body, and mood. If you want to, like, in its most like easiest form to say what it is. It's what we think, what's what we feel, and literally how we hold our bodies, and how those three things work in alignment to shape how we view the world.
Right.
It's literally our worldview. Those three things define how an individual views the world. And those three things are shaped by past experiences, past relationships, where someone grew up, how they grew up, quality of life, even like what their spiritual beliefs and experiences are, whether it's religious or something else. So all the little things that are part of who we are and how we are in the world, that brought us to this very moment is what defines an individual's somatic viewpoint, their
Which,
worldview.
if we talk about somatics and going back to this idea of being fiery versus, there's a nice way to say things when you're angry, which most people would struggle with. How does somatics play a part in that?
I mean, for me, somatics really was the doorway to understanding our collective embodiment, right? Like the sort of interconnectedness of all living beings, for me. And I distinguish between reaction and a response. I think the reaction is, I want someone to feel what I am feeling, and then somewhere unconsciously, so I can be seen and heard, but most importantly, I can be understood, right? We don't
Yes.
actually want people, if we stop and pause, we don't actually want people to feel bad if we're feeling bad. But it's
Yes.
the desire to be understood. I practice very hard to respond rather than to react. And that's where you can say hard things in the kindest way,
I just
right?
got so emotional by that. Sorry. My eyes are watering.
Tell me.
Ooh, that's so good. Okay. I'm sorry.
Well, here's where we are, Yeefa, that we're in a point in history where so much is so critical to like where we're going to go, the trajectory of where humanity will go. And if I tell a lot of people, like, I want to see you, I want to understand you, I want you to be heard, they have similar reactions, because the way that society, not just in the United States, but global society, is structured to keep, the masses invisible.
Yes.
So we don't see ourselves, much less are we seen and heard and experienced by others. There's just a very small circle of people that may understand us, but it's our desire to want to be understood. It's
Yeah.
our desire to be witnessed, to be seen. It's part of the makeup of who we are as human beings. It's that interconnectedness requires us to be not just connected because, oh, we're all human beings and it's not that. It goes beyond that, right? There's a socialization of like what it means to be a human being in our society, and that visibility is a critical part of like our sense of belonging, our sense of worthiness. We can't just create that stuff in a vacuum and be like, oh, I'm good, I think I'm great, and I don't care if 100 people just told me in the span of 2 hours that I suck. Like, that's just, it
It
doesn't
doesn't work that way.
work. It doesn't work. That doesn't work. Yeah.
What is an example of how you would use somatics in like organizing? Because you've coined this term, embodied organizing. Did I say it correctly? Is that
Totally. And such a great question. And it's so important because, back when I started organizing 25 years ago, the people who were organizing were not directly impacted by the issues that they were organizing. right?
Yes.
Now, fast forward to a little more than 2 decades, we see that the people who are on the front lines of community organizing now are directly affected, impacted by the very issues that they're organizing.
Yes.
So not only do they have direct trauma from experiencing the struggles of organizing and sort of oppressive systems, laws, and policies, but they have the secondary trauma too, right? Which most organizers, most frontline organizers experience.
Can you explain the secondary trauma?
Being around people who are suffering from oppressive systems, seeing that firsthand, witnessing somebody else's pain, somebody else's trauma. It's not yours, but you're bearing witness to it. And whether people can acknowledge it or not, that impacts you. That impacts your mind, that impacts your heart. And, it impacts your body. It impacts your body, and it changes the way you see yourself in the world. And so when I started organizing, nobody told me what organizing was. I never got any formal training. It's just like, go out and do it. It was just me. There was nobody else in that neighborhood office. I had some really, really badass, kick-ass members who were leaders. They're like, this is the way it's done. And so I spent about 10 years, no boundaries. I had no boundaries. I worked 10 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours. I remember this. I know it was more than once, but I once spent the night at my office prepping for a very large event of 500 people. 500 welfare recipients were coming in front of the mayoral candidates right before Bloomberg announced and then won, which was like stupid because he wasn't at our mayoral candidates forum. But I spent the night, and that felt normal to me, right? And then I hit 35, and I had, like many other people in my generation and my age range, we were starting to suffer physiological things like gastric issues because we weren't eating, we were working a lot. And so embodied organizing is really based on the premise of like, look, I'm not gonna I believe that capitalism perpetuates a lot of, if not all of the oppression in the United States. Because this is where I live, this is where I work, right? I also think capitalism and humanity are going in opposite trajectories, right? So I came to I had my come to Jesus moment, right? As a Muslim, I have my come to Jesus moment. This is I'm working to dismantle these oppressive systems that are perpetuated by capitalism, and I am exploiting my own labor.
Yes.
These organizations benefited from it, right? Yes. So in a lot of ways, I was simultaneously perpetuating capitalism by exploiting my own labor and working myself literally into an early grave. And any organizer that's been trained by me has heard, you have to be alive to do this work. And that's what I realized, that I was working myself into an early grave. I could work 7, 8, 9 hours and be really efficient and get everything that I needed to get done and feel good about it, because there's always more work the next day. Mm-hmm. So embodied organizing is based on this premise that we actually have to be the living embodiment, the manifestation of the things we truly believe in all aspects, and be self-aware of it. And that in order to have longevity for social change work, we had to integrate mindfulness. We had to integrate wellness and healing. We had to integrate this embodied lens into organizing that moved away from Alinsky style organizing, which is like throw down, throw down, throw down. People pat you on your head. Oh, you work 30 hours a day. I mean, it was just
yes.
Right?
That's corporate America, basically.
You
show up, you're sick, you're tired, you're hungry, you keep going. You churn it out. You churn it out. Churn it out.
It's worse than corporate America because we don't. I got paid $20,000 my first 2 years, working 12, and the woman that was supervising me only had a couple of years more experience than me. She was getting paid $20,000, the same salary for working 3 hours a week.
Right.
So I was like, there's too much that's like exploitive about how we are treating ourselves, and then how literally organizations are treating each other, themselves and each other. So embodied organizing is really about, you cannot forget yourself in the work that you're doing. You cannot, if you are authentically wanting to change the world, you begin by changing yourself to align with your core values. So you are a living embodiment of your values, and therefore thereby you've already changed the world. So the rest of it is like more authentic.
Yes.
Right.
It's leaning more to, it's like a human-centered kind of organizing, you know, as opposed to like this sort of top-down and like rough, do it till I drop dead, and then somebody else has to pick it up for me.
Absolutely. And you know what? I can't stop the 20-year-olds that got all this energy that are like, I can do it. It's fine. I'm like, that is great. Here are some tools for when you find your moment that you can't.
Yeah.
And instead of just leaving the work, know that you have skills and tools to do it a different way, that you shift when you're ready.
That makes sense, because it is true. You know, you have all this energy when you're young, and you can't think of things like mortality doesn't make sense to you. No. You know, you don't think about that your body could give out. Like you were saying, you started having all this physiological problems, and when you're 20, you don't think about that because you can stay up all night and nothing happens to you. You know, you can stay up for 2 nights straight and nothing happens to you. But when you hit 30 or 40 or 50, it's like, no, I can't do that anymore. And you have to teach that going forward. And the best you can do is, for someone who's 20, is like give them the knowledge. And I think that goes back to like a lot of the things that I've talked about in my podcast is like, how do you pass on things to younger generations? And this is clearly a way for you to pass on your knowledge to younger generations. I'm curious.
Yeah. I wait to be asked.
Yeah. Okay. That was my question. That was going to be a question. Yeah.
No, I definitely wait to be asked. I understand that I have just as much, if not more, to learn from them than they might have to learn from me. And that's how I meet people where they are. It's not like, hey, you know what? I've been doing this for a while. Let me tell you how it is. Because how it was for me is like not how it is now.
Yeah.
It just isn't. It just isn't. And I work with a lot of young people. I love working with young people so much, and I have like this, lingering fear that I've never said out loud, but I'm going to, which is like, what point are they going to look at me and like, yeah, maybe you're too old to work with us? No,
I'm not too old.
they're look, the folks that are on the front lines that are young, they're like, they've lived their entire life fighting for not just themselves, not just for their families, but their communities. Their wisdom is infinite, and I have so much to learn from them. And anytime anybody wants to be like, well, how did you handle this? I'm like, well, in my day, this is what we did. But how are you doing it right now? Like, tell me how you're doing it now. Like, is there something, can we do an exchange here or like knowledge?
Exactly. It's sort of like this balance of, understanding that times change and maybe some things that you have to offer could make sense, but some things they don't. And there is this sort of exchange from the older versus the younger organizers. And that's a really beautiful place to be in for you. And I think that embodiment goes back to your embodied organizing is like, check yourself first, check in with yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, this is like, it's a practice of like not bringing your ego with you. Now, if I'm in physical danger, I want my ego to take over and speak to me and tell me what to do. Everywhere else, like, I don't need you right now. good for now.
So I guess one question I have is, what values came with you as a child that brought you into organizing? What led you to feel like this is something that you could be latch onto and become passionate about?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, this saying that my grandfather said a lot, which was like the people are the source of all power. And my grandmother was always in service of her family. Like if there was a grandchild that was born somewhere in the world, homie would get on a plane and then go take care of that newborn child for a few months to help out her own child. I mean, it was just so beautiful. It was just like a really beautiful offering of love.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, so I come from a Bangladeshi Muslim family. I was taught that to love myself means you love yourself by loving your family. I was told that directly, but I got to see it from my grandmother. That doesn't work so great in the United States. I came here and I was like, I'm behind the 8 ball here a little bit. This is not how it works here. But being in service of people you love, people you care about, and then humanity, like people, period. And this idea that people are the source of all power, it wasn't just political for me. It meant something much deeper to me. Even when I was younger, it meant that people had agency. I mean, I didn't use these words when I was younger, but it meant that people had agency, that they could choose, and that agency was a critical part of like what defined them as a human being. My parents, like I just turned 48. My mother still sort of like occasionally tells people that, oh, she's going to go to law school. She's going to be a lawyer. She's been wanting me to go to law school since like I was a little child because I had a big mouth. And I talked a lot and I argued a lot. But this idea that, that people have that I can like embrace and love now. But the agency, I never felt in absence of it, right? And I think even now, growing up, when my mother's saying, like, you're going to be a lawyer, I felt agency and choice to say, I don't want to be a lawyer. Like, that's not going to work for me. But eventually there's like a balance and a dance, right? Like I majored in political science for my parents and philosophy for me.
Okay.
Like, where's the balance here? So, it's being in service. It's being in service of other people, of humanity, of your family. And this is weird because you're asking me all these questions about my family, but the most important thing I think that defines me of this like being in service is I'm an identical twin. I shared my mother's womb with another human being, and I think that's profound. Yes, it's a profound experience. And sure, I took up more space than she did, but like here we are, like actually becoming human beings, and I got to do it with somebody else.
Yeah.
And I'm sure in some way she helped me grow. I helped her grow in the womb, outside of the womb. So there's all these like, literal, familial, and then like intimate and spiritual ways in which I feel so assured that my life is supposed to be a life of service. And a service specifically for Black, Indigenous women of color. I feel my greatest calling to women that and I actually changed in the last like 10 years. I kept hearing women say the same things, like very thematically. I worked 1.5 years, and every woman I talked to would say, I don't feel worthy. I don't feel like I'm enough. And I was like, okay, I'm going to spend like the next 5 years just like creating things that make women feel less isolated, particularly women of color. Help women understand why they have those narratives, both from their life experiences, but from society too. And then I just never stopped after 5 years. I just kept doing it.
Kept going. That's your
yeah. So even to this day, I live a life of service specifically to women of color. Yeah.
Can you give me some examples of some things that you like, what you were called to do for women? I read somewhere that you said that you put yourself aside during your journey in organizing for the goodness of organizing in general. And then there must have been a shift for you where you're like, wait a second, I'm not going to keep putting myself aside, my womanness aside. Like, women have these issues that need to be addressed. And I'm tired of like sidestepping that just for the sake of, the collective good.
Yeah, I worked with a lot of I worked under a lot of executive leadership that sort of wanted my ideas, but then didn't want to necessarily have them heard or accredited to me. I had one director who would take me 5 minutes before a staff meeting, take me into a room, ask me what I thought, and then literally repeat what I said and hint it as his own. Now, I mean, I was so, when the first couple of times that happened, I was just astounded. I was just like,
it's crazy.
Is this for real? Is this really happening? And I decided that I didn't care about that stuff. That I actually, if that was important to him, that was important to him. I wanted those ideas to actually see fruition. I wanted them to manifest. I wanted them to happen. I mean, though those were all me speaking on behalf in our internal organizations meetings, what people were telling me, what members were telling me. So I didn't care. I was like, oh, and I did that a lot. I did that. I mean, up till my last job at an organization 10 years ago. And then I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, people are taking credit for my life experiences. Like, everything I create, all this work that I create is really based on like what I've lived. Like, embodied organizing, yes, it integrates organizing skills and embodied leadership, but they're experiences that I lived. They come from the wisdom of those experiences. And this dude is like telling me he owns them, it's his, and I'm like,
no way. I'm done.
I'm like, that's a wrap. I'm out. I'm like, it's very. I'm the kind of person like makes family with everyone. I don't know why I need to do this, but I do. I treat people like they're my family, and of course, not everybody's gonna be your family
that way. Yeah.
I learned the hard way. And I much prefer this path that I'm on now, where I have freedom to experiment, freedom to work with the folks that I choose to work with, and really don't have to feel like I have to compromise myself in any way.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I have had that happen to me in organizations that I've worked, where I repeatedly am giving some information, and either they ignore it, but then like, a couple months later, someone is like, oh, I have this fabulous idea. And it's like, I said that 2 months ago,
Mm-hmm.
And it's so frustrating.
I don't think there is a woman at least in this country, that has not experienced what we've experienced. Mm-hmm. It's misogyny, it's systemic, it's deeply structural and cultural, and I'm not having it. That's why, I say universal partnership is a national consulting practice, which is literally a fancy way to say that I work by myself. Like, I work myself by myself.
I completely, for me, it's been life-changing quitting my job and starting to work for myself, because again, there is that autonomy and I get to make the decisions. And if you don't you can't take my words anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
I do think it's important to say that it's a privilege for both of us to be at having come to a point where we can decide that. And I certainly was not financially secure. Like, I gave up financial security to like be like, I've had enough. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to take. And it was abuse. It was abuse in a lot of ways. Um, but a lot of young women in general don't have, particularly women of color, Black women of color don't have the they don't have the ability to do that, right? Or the choices to do that. And I think it's important that part of my work is not just working with women to help to support them in seeing all the magic that they are and how they can navigate a world that wants to keep them down and tells them that they're less than, but also work to sort of catalyze structural changes within their organizations. I'm not, this year particularly, because we're like still in a pandemic, but last year was so heavy, so heavy on so many levels that I'm just like, look, there are an infinite amount of people that could do surface level work that you're asking me to do. I'm only doing work with people who want to go deep.
Deep,
like
yes.
That's it.
Done with the surface. You got to go deep. You got to go deep.
I know that some people need to do the surface work to begin with. I respect that. It's not a diss. It's not a judgment. But that's not where I want to do work. I want to do work with organizations and individuals that are ready to do the deep change work. Like, make sure that you believe in Black women leadership, then get rid of your leadership and hire Black women. Like, where is your Black women leadership? You can't just say it. You have to like be in them. If that's a value for you, for your organization, then you have to embody it. Enough with like we're saying it. I need people to live it. I need people to manifest it in actions. And it's not just I need to do it. Like, all these things that I ask people to do, I never ask people to practice or do things that I haven't done myself or I'm not currently doing. This thing about embodied leadership, this, for me, it's authenticity. That's the key, that I do not speak of that which is beyond my experience, and that I'm not asking people to do something that is beyond my experience, because then how do I support them if I don't actually have the experiential knowledge of it? And it's the idea that the theoretical and the experiential, if they work in tandem, that it's hella powerful.
Yeah. So Jamel Rackley is tuning in and she says, embody it, yes, with an exclamation point.
Yes, I'm with it. I work on it every day. I fail a whole bunch, but that's how I think my failures is what makes me badass, I have to say.
I guess I'm curious, how does white supremacy culture move in the whole like organizing plus like the corporations that you're going into? I mean, it's confusing, I think, that this whole topic of white supremacy culture, people think of like white supremacy as like KKK, but then there's like this doctrine of white supremacy culture being a way that things are happening to people based on a doctrine, so to speak. And I think it's just confusing for everyone right now to hear these terms, white supremacy culture, white supremacy culture.
I think that's right. And I think that's by design. White supremacy is a system. It's systemic. It impacts everything we think and feel, regardless of who we are. It is constantly sort of beaten into us in direct and indirect ways. It's like it's in the messaging, right?
Yeah.
And it's not by design part is like, we're going to tell you that it's KKK. You can just point a finger at it like, oh, that person's a Nazi or a white supremacist and they're bad. white supremacy designed those, like, what do they call it, the fall person.
Oh yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
But it isn't. White supremacy is so much more than that. And it's not for me necessarily to define, but it's like you have to practice every day to undo the things that are being built into us. And the best way that I say is, I have an anecdote. I have my niece who's 9, who I love to death. She's so beautiful, so sassy, so smart. But I was just afraid that she was a girl and what it was going to be like to be a girl in this world. And she was like 2.5. She had never seen a Disney movie, never been to a movie theater, never watched any of those things on TV, never read any of those books. And she would see like Elsa or something and be like, "Princess." I was like, "Oh, you want to be a princess warrior like Wonder Woman?" "No, I just want to be a princess, just a princess." I'm like, "You sure you don't want to be a princess warrior?" Like, all of the depictions are all white, right? Like blonde, blue hair, white princesses. And I'm like, that's not you. That's not you. And I didn't want her to be hurt by it. But that taught me something. Here is a 2.5-year-old, has never been exposed directly to these storylines, and she still wants to be it, which means this is constantly around us.
Yeah.
So this idea of white supremacy is constantly around us. That
Yes.
there is a level that most people, including white people, mind you, will never be able to achieve. That there is some superiority that is like unhuman, right? And that it's meant to keep everybody down. It's meant to keep access to wealth, access to resources, access to opportunities to a very select few people. But it's like white supremacy systemically in terms of economy, but there's culture, right? There's culture. There's even like white supremacy in our relationships. Like, it's not something that just goes away. White supremacy is now calling Latinx people in Florida and around the world not brown people, but white people, because it is, yes, girl, yes. It is trying to keep itself alive. It's the idea that who gets to decide what is being on time? Who gets to decide what's worthy work? And, I think 45 being in office sort of like ignited this shitstorm of like what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Yes.
I think truly what has brought up these conversations around white supremacy now is that we see that everything that we held true about labor, about work, how it needed to be done, where it needed to be done, all just blew up over the last year.
Yes, in the pandemic.
Yes. You know what? You don't have to work 7 days a week to be effective. You don't have to be in the office.
Yeah.
We don't have to meet. We can do this over email. So there's all these things that are just imploding now around the sort of status quo of what's acceptable, work. What is acceptable? People are like, no, we don't. Offices are obsolete.
Right.
Right. And a lot of ways in which white supremacy in our culture seeps into our individual living beings is through work.
Yeah.
Like, you got to be on time. Why?
As long as you get your work done.
I think some people need support, thereby need supervisors, but do we all need to be supervised? What is this idea of supervision, management? It hasn't transformed much, not in corporate America. In some parts of like our movements and our movement organizations, certainly a work in progress, but it's a construct, but it's a very real construct, and it's in our systems, it's in our culture, both macro, micro, everything in between. And it's, I see in your question around woke racism, like people say like, yeah, I'm woke. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, It's been a fantastic moment for you because it's not enough to just have to be woke. You actually have to, because the things that are forcing us to be woke are continuous and forever perpetuating as long as these systems exist.
Yeah.
These systems of oppression, these systems of racism, inequality, misogyny, patriarchy, these isms exist. They are continuously impacting us and shaping what we think and feel, and how we navigate the world. So being woke is not enough. Like, you have to actually continuously practice to like disrupt those patterns that live in every single one of us. Like, every single one of us, if we live and interact in this world, which we do, will have these systems and these narratives and these beliefs like woven into us. And it's our duty for ourselves and the work that we're doing and for our communities. And let's face it, let's keep it big, for humanity. Like, we
Yeah.
gotta do our work.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because you really start to see once you, and I guess the idea of wokeness, from my understanding, is that you get this hallelujah, vision of, oh my God, I've been living in this white supremacy culture all my life and not knowing that it was taking place.
Mhm.
And I think for some people, I remember talking with a coworker, and every time I would come to her and I'd say, "Don't you think that was a little bit like racist?" And she's like, "No, no, 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 no. That wasn't racist. That was just X, Y, and Z." But then when the BLM stuff started happening, and people are starting to read books now and getting information, then she
Mhm.
was like, "Oh, yeah, that was racist," and she was a person of color, a woman of color too. And so I think for this idea of like wokeness, for some people, they need to hold on to it because it's like an aha moment for them. But I do agree that you can't stay in that. Like, you've got to
Yeah.
go past that to what is the next level, because just to stay in that is like, you're not, you gotta know that it's happening. You gotta wake up, and then you gotta go like into realizing that these things are happening, like the princess dolls,
Yeah. I mean, stay woke, wokeness has been co-opted, right, and culturally appropriated over the last however many years, particularly. And then, just by nature of that, by virtue of that sort of being co-opting and being overly used, it loses its meaning.
Yes.
It loses its power, and it's literally just saying like, these things are happening to us and we have to be present and aware to it, not just in one moment, because it's not a destination. It's actually shifting your way of life. You change the way you think about yourself in the context of the world. That's not a moment, that's forever.
I love how you said that it's been co-opted. This is
Yeah.
like huge, it has been co-opted. And what I also find interesting is that there's this whole movement of people now who are they've taken now this idea of it being co-opted, and now they're trying to bring it down. They're like, they say it's a religion, and we've all been brainwashed into the wokeness religion. I'm curious, what are your thoughts about that whole side of the situation?
Yeah, I mean, look, the right has always used our tools and tactics better because they're more outrageous. They don't give a shit. They've just done that successfully for as long as I can remember. But the right co-ops terms from the Black community, from Black folks, from the left, from our movements. And when they're done using it to legitimize and quote unquote make themselves cool, then they turn it against us and say,
Yes,
well,
that's
this
exactly
is
what.
the problem. This is the problem. So racism isn't the problem. Critical race theory is the problem. I mean, it's absurd on its face. Like, this country is full of like, political punditry that's like straight up buffoonery. It makes no sense. And, when you've spent the last, 50, 60 years depreciating public education, we are where we are. We have, New Yorkers know what kind of person Donald Trump is. We've always known. But you come to a point in history of this country where someone like that can get elected.
Right.
And that people can sort of like say one thing and then the next second say the exact opposite thing and say, no, it makes sense. We've basically cultivated, this country has basically cultivated and educated a populace to be perpetually gaslit.
Yes.
You didn't hear that. You didn't hear that. I didn't just say that. What are you talking about? I mean, that's where we are, right?
Yes, yes, yes. And speaking of the things that he's done, where he, the grab the pussy thing, but everybody still thinks he's a great person. Like, how is your character? How are you still a great person when you are, doing these things? It's like I don't get it. I don't get it at all.
I can't even believe we talked about him this much. I hate myself for it. I'm just telling you. But I agree with you 100%. Absolutely. It makes no sense.
I guess we're nearing the end. I want to bring things back to something positive. Mm-hmm. How do you experience joy? You do all of this laborious work for people, for other people. You give of yourself.
Yeah.
By the way, you told me before I started the interview that you have been in a pod with 10 people of your family during the pandemic, which again, it's like this selfless act. And I know you don't like to toot your own horn, but you are an organizer. You take your family members in. You treat other people like family, even if they don't think that they, even if they don't latch on to that idea and concept of family. How do you experience joy?
Yeah, this is a beautiful question, and it's the first question I ask when I do my self-care. Like, how do you develop self-care practices? What gives you joy? So I'll tell you, it's very simple for me. I have been potted up with the whole Mohiuddin clan, which includes their Dudleys, but it includes my niece and nephew, and they call me Rusia Moni.
Okay.
Rusia is just short for Rusia because kids can't do the I, and Moni means most precious. And hearing them say, like hearing the sound of them say my name, oh my God, I can't, it melts my heart. I'm just thinking about it, it melts my heart. The way they see me melts my heart and gives me deep joy. And I want to be that person every day.
Oh, that's so awesome. I also would like you to let my viewers know if they wanted to get more information about embodied organizing and about you, like where should they go to look you up?
Universalpartnership.org is a great place to go.
Awesome.
I do a lot of art too. So if you want to see like a non-normal facilitator Rusia role, you can go to Instagram and follow me, Rooster47. It's just all art. This is all art, which is my self-care.
You also have an Etsy. Don't mention your Etsy. You have an Etsy shop, don't you, of your art?
I do. It's 11.19, I believe. I don't know why I had that. I feel like it's fun, so I sell a printer or two every now and then. But it's my art is my self-care, so it's deeply a part of me living what I preach.
That's amazing. Thank you. There's been so many nuggets of information and helpful tips for people in this interview with you. I really appreciate you being on my show and bearing all your secrets to us. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I would like to remind everyone to tune in on August 17th. I'm going to be interviewing Professor Angela Ray, and she is writing a book on linguists of the African American. It was a group of men who had a collection of libraries and taught literacy to other people during a time when Black people were not able to read and write. It was against the law. And she's written a book about this. So please tune in August 17th at 7 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for joining me on this podcast. Thank you, Rusia. And we are out. Good night.
Yeefa.